Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I am a member of the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women, one of the civic partners for this show. Today we're hosting a conversation with Paul Siskine and the Reverend James Galainski from the Canton's Unitarian Universalist Church. Welcome, gentlemen. It's nice to have you here. This is our first show for the fall season of 2017, our 13th year of doing North Country Matters. So, these gentlemen are here today to talk about the Social Justice Institute of the Canton Unitarian Universalist Church and the Creating Bully-Free Workplaces Conference, which is coming up at the end of Canton. James, would you start us off by telling us a little bit about the social justice movement as it presents itself through your church and congregation where you serve as pastor? What's the history of social action in your church? Can you kind of give us a thumbnail sketch of the kind of things that your congregation has been concerned about over the years?
Okay. Well, our congregation dates back to 1825. And I would say in the grand scheme of things, one of the greatest social justice initiatives we ever did was help St. Lawrence become what it is. Members of our congregation donated land and money. The minister, the Reverend Remington, who is the grandfather of Frederick Remington, actually quit his job to fundraise for St. Lawrence University. Initially a theological school for Universalist ministers, but also a university for men and women. And it was one of the first universities in New York State to have men and women co-educational, and the Reverend whoa, just lost thought. We ordained the first female minister who was a graduate of St. Lawrence Theological School.
That's right, that's right.
Olympia Brown,
right.
There we go, who preached at our church and was in the North Country for a couple of years.
And as I recall that story, when she applied, they didn't know she was a woman until after she got here and had been accepted. So.
And there was some reluctance, too, when they found out. They were like, well, I don't think this is maybe something for you, but I'll keep that between you and the great head of the church.
Right. So that was actually a great groundbreaking opportunity for women, wasn't it, here
Yes.
in the North Country?
Yes.
So what are the kinds of things that your church does now with social justice? I know every year you do a social justice award and recognize people from the community for their work.
Well, I would say last year there's been somewhat of a focus on Black Lives Matter and racial equity. We recently put up a sign on our church, Black Lives Matter, which has been a little bit controversial. And we have a very active social action committee, which is involved in immigration justice and racial equity as well. Over the years, my predecessor, Max Coots, helped start the I was going to say, help me out, Paul, the thing on Main Street where churches work together to close.
Church and Community.
Church and Community.
Program,
and so
right?
many of our members are still very active in the church and
That's right.
community. And so, yeah.
So this is very much think globally but act locally kind of an operation with a focus on different events or different topics as they become important in the life of the community and in the congregation.
And one of the things I think you'll hear if you're ever at our church is it's a common phrase you just hear people say. It's deeds, not creeds. We're a non-creedal church. We don't say, I don't say, Paul, you have to believe these certain things. We may disagree theologically on some things, but we agree that it's good to be love and act out love in our world.
Okay, thank you. So one of the new programs that the church is undertaking is the Social Justice Initiative. So Paul, can you tell us a little bit about what the mission of that is going to be here in the North Country?
Sure. As James just mentioned, one of the things we try to do in the congregation is to actually live out our values. And one of the Unitarian Universalist principles is working for social justice and equity in all human relations. And so an idea that I and my partner had was to create this new program at the church to help us not just talk about these things, but actually do things within the community. So the Social Justice Initiative will be a series of biennial conferences spread over a 10-year period, so there will be 5 conferences. And each conference will focus on a different social justice issue that's pertinent and important to the North Country community and throughout the northern New York region. So our goals for the Social Justice Initiative really have a number of different layers. Number one, we'd like to get increased public awareness, information out to people about the different topics for the different conferences. But a little bit deeper than that, we're hoping not only just to discuss the issues, but to give people concrete ways and things that they can take back to their home communities that they can do to improve life in the North Country, ways to address these issues. We also would like to help organizations throughout the region and individuals to make connections and share resources, because in a rural area we're spread out with physical distance, and as we were chatting before we started filming, very often people don't know the resources that are here. We really do have a rich pool of talented people, resources, but sometimes the physical distance, sometimes the weather, those things intercede. And so giving a venue and a time for people to come together and share information and make connections can help us all improve our own lives and share the resources. And the other thing that we'd like to do is to help bring people up to the North Country who may not be familiar with the talented people that we have up here and who may not understand the issues that we face. So people from downstate, the Albany area, the New York City area, Buffalo region, Boston, bringing those people around here to let them see what we're about and what we do up here.
And that, of course, is one of the things that the 4 colleges in our region already do, is bring a lot of people to our area, but often there's a bit of culture shock when they come perhaps from an urban area and they come to a more rural area like the North Country. So, James, how do you see the Social Justice Initiative impacting and complementing the work that you're already doing in your congregation?
That's a good question. Well, I think so when you get Unitarian Universalists, we tend to be highly individualistic and have different opinions of what to do and how to do it. Sometimes my job as a minister, I'm herding cats, is what they say, which is hard to do. But I think what Paul and Todd are doing now is giving us a platform and a path to go on. Because sometimes we feel passionate and compassion for certain issues, but what are the next steps? What do we do? And
Where's the structure?
Yes, and this gives us a platform, and it's really exciting because I think a lot of us in our work, in our daily lives, work in many different ways social justice into our lives, whether we're nurses or professors or social workers or whatever. But this gives us like a one kind of thing to all rally around, which is important for a faith community, I think.
Right, and so the first initiative, Paul, that you're working on is, it's called the Working Together, Creating a Bully-Free Workplaces Conference. And it's going to address some of the problems of harassment and bullying that people may be facing in their jobs and in their occupations. This is a very, very timely conference because a recent survey of American workers found that many, many people are experiencing these kinds of things, and it's impacting their performance on the job, it's impacting their health. And of course, one of the things that we know in AAUW from our work with what we call our Legal Advocacy Fund is that these behaviors don't affect an individual just on the job. They spill over into your private life, your family life, particularly if you are trying to find some kind of redress, whether it's legal redress or through perhaps your HR or whatever. It's very, very difficult to sometimes address these issues because you don't quite know where to start to begin with. You may not know what the law is, and so often what we are expected to do is go through the courts, which is a very expensive thing, and it doesn't really solve the problem for a lot of other people unless it happens to be something that gets class action status. So, how will your conference address some of these issues that people are facing in the workplace in terms of aggression and incivility and harassment? What's the framework you're going to use to start to address these issues?
Sure. As you brought up, the issue of workplace bullying has many different facets and layers, and it's actually a very, very complex legal issue that is really only just beginning to be addressed in the United States. So part of the conference will be talking about what are the legal issues involved, and I can go through some of those in a little bit. But once we establish that baseline understanding of what are the legal issues involved, the conference really is hoping to not just talk about the problems, but we really want to equip people with either personal information and skills that they can use, or if they're a manager of a workplace, that they can bring to their workplace and create a healthier work environment. So within the conference, we have quite a number of different topics that will be addressed. The keynote speaker is Dr. Maureen Duffy. She's a practicing therapist, and she's also the author of, or co-author of, two of the most important books about workplace bullying. She actually approaches the topic as workplace mobbing rather than bullying, and I'll talk about that in a little bit.
And tell us where she's from. What's her background?
She's a practicing therapist. She's also a workplace consultant. She does workshops for management, HR, etc., all over the country. And as I said, she's an author who really recognized for these two important books that lay the groundwork and have really reshaped our understanding of workplace bullying, that it's usually not just a one-on-one relationship, it's a whole systemic system.
It's a culture.
Yes,
It's a culture,
within
right,
the workplace.
okay.
So she will be the keynote speaker in the morning, and then in the afternoon we will have breakout workshop sessions, and those will be led by individuals locally and also regionally. So one of the sessions will focus on the legal aspects, the legal definition of what is workplace bullying, and that will be led by Mike Schlicht, who is one of the co-founders of the New York Healthy Workplace Advocates. And I work with Mike. We go down to Albany and we're lobbying for the Healthy Workplace Bill. Mike will be coming from Buffalo. And then John Pepe, who is from the Boston, Worcester area, and he's working in Massachusetts in terms of trying to pass the Healthy Workplace Bill there. And John's background is as a public school teacher and athletics coach. Then we will have a separate workshop about mental health impacts, and Dr. Duffy will co-lead that with Kelly Arias, who's a practicing therapist down in New York City. And Kelly and I have worked together presenting workshops about the mental health impacts of workplace bullying. And then we will have a workshop specifically for managers and HR people. This will be led by Tedra Cobb, local consultant who has done a lot of work about healthy workplaces and good managerial practices. And then we will have a workshop about conflict resolution techniques, because there are different approaches outside of the legal system and outside of workplace disciplinary actions and sanctions. And that will be co-led by the Reverend Kathleen Buckley from St. Lawrence University, and a professor from St. Lawrence, Dr. Laura Ridees, who is the chair of the Peace Studies Department, and she also has specialist training in a type of conflict resolution technique called restorative justice. So they will run that workshop.
So that perhaps will get more to addressing how do we change the culture of our workplace,
Yes.
and make it a healthier place,
Right.
where there's more civility and there's more respect.
Yes, and again, that will provide useful tools not only for targets, victims, but also for managers of, I have this situation in my workplace, I'm not sure how to grapple with it, how do I get parties who are in conflict to sit down and work out their differences. And how can I, as a manager, help that conversation? Then we will have a session on education issues, because education is one of the fields where workplace bullying is actually pretty prevalent. And so one presenter will be Francesco Portellos, who is a public school teacher in the New York school system, and he's coming up from New York, and I'll be working with Francesco, and because my background is in higher education, I'll talk about the higher education aspects of it. And then we have a special workshop devoted to other local professions. This will be run by Rolani Prudhomme, who works for the Occupational Health Clinic in Canton, and she's putting together a panel to talk about some of the prevalent industries in the North Country. So it will focus on healthcare, which is one of the biggest industries up here, agricultural workers, and then also correctional officers. And then after those sessions, we will also have networking time, where people who really have specific issues can gather together and talk about, I work for the county, what resources do we have in the county, these are the issues in the highway department, etc. And so people can really make even more focused connections.
So it sounds like this will be a little bit of tell your story, but it'll also be, okay, you're not unique. It turns out that you have not faced, you think you're facing this alone, but you're really not. Lots of other people have, and these are some successful tools that other people have used to address these issues. Is that about right?
Yes, and that's very important, because a lot of people don't understand how prevalent harassment and bullying is.
It's very easy to think you're going through this alone and you're the only person, and when you start getting in situations like this where you can start to compare notes and hear other people's stories, you realize that you're not alone, and that maybe something that's worked for you would help the next person as well. So, and you mentioned a little bit about the Healthy Workplaces bill. One of the ways that we know that we can address these kinds of issues is through legislative action. AAUW was involved in the 10-year campaign to get the Dignity for All Students Act passed in New York State, which addresses various forms of discrimination and harassment issues in schools, among other things. So let's chat just briefly about the New York Healthy Workplace Advocates and the work you're doing to get this in front of our legislators and convince them that this is something they need to go to work on, because that's often a slow process
Yes.
to educate them.
Yes, as you said, it can take 10
Yeah.
years or more to get a piece of important
It
legislation.
feels like when it finally happens, it looks like an overnight success, but that's only for people who haven't been in the trenches.
Exactly.
So,
Part of the issue has to do with the complexity of terminology and the differences between the way we in common parlance use some of these words versus their specific legal definition. So there's a lot of misunderstanding. So some of the words that you put on the table, harassment, bullying, discrimination, incivility, hostile workplaces, safe workplaces, they have common meanings, but they also have specific legal definitions. And part of the problem with current law, not just in New York State, but in every state in the United States, is that there are two loopholes in the law having to do with these definitions. Loophole number one is the legal definition of the word harassment. We use the word harassment to mean uncivil behavior and aggressive behavior towards another person, a colleague, a person on the street, etc. But according to New York State law and the law of every single state in the country, harassment only counts as harassment if it's what's known as discriminatory harassment, which means my aggressive behavior toward you would have to be rooted in some kind of animus that I have in
towards you as a person, with some characteristic of your person.
But it has to be one of those characteristics that are protected by the Title VII protected classes. So I'm allowed to harass you as an individual and just say, I hate your guts. And that's perfectly legal, even if you do that in the workplace. But I'm not allowed to say, I hate your guts because you're a woman, because then that puts the animus based in a protected class. And so the distinction is discriminatory harassment, which is the legal definition of harassment, and non-discriminatory harassment, which is bullying. And the problem is, one of the loopholes, that bullying, non-discriminatory harassment in the workplace is perfectly legal. And there's nothing that compels an employer or coworkers to prevent that kind of behavior. So when people say an employer has an anti-harassment policy, there's this big loophole that it only prevents discriminatory harassment. So that's one of the big loopholes. The other big loophole in the law is, a lot of people actually don't understand this, that a policy that an employer has is actually only a one-way contract. It says that the employee is bound to abide by these policies. But the loophole in the law is that an employer is not bound by law to uphold their own policies. So they get to choose. If we have a policy that says we're against both discriminatory harassment and bullying, and they might explicitly say, we don't allow our workers to curse at each other in the workplace, which would fall under non-discriminatory harassment. Well, they can decide person A and B are having a conflict, they're cursing at each other, they can discipline either party. But if the same thing is happening between person X and Y, if for some reason they choose not to uphold their own policy, neither of those people has legal standing to say, you have a policy that's protecting me, why aren't you protecting me? So that's a very, very important legal loophole.
And that goes back to culture, doesn't it? The culture of a workplace, the culture of a corporation, that you can look great on paper, but in terms of practice, it all falls apart.
Exactly. And that's the interesting and subtle thing about laws, is laws can they can do three things. Number one, they can encourage good behavior by saying, if you don't behave well, this sanction will come on you, this penalty will come on you. And so, in a positive way, a law is supposed to promote good behavior and deter bad behavior. And the way a law discourages bad behavior is by saying, if you do this thing, you will face a penalty, a fine or jail time. The third thing that a law does is, if somebody has been victimized, that it provides some sort of restitution for a victim. So what the Healthy Workplace Bill is intending to do is to, on the positive side, put some mechanism in place to fill those two legal loopholes, which will then create social pressure, legal pressure on employers to actually change the culture of the environment in the workplace. So it's not meant to be just punitive, just like any law, it's meant to promote good behavior. But if an employer or an actual worker is acting uncivilly in a bullying manner, it also gives the employer and or the victim a way to stop the behavior.
Well, what we know about laws is that they're great on the books, but if you don't have the regulatory framework to enact them, you don't have the reporting mechanism, and you don't have the education about what the provisions are, it all falls apart very quickly. And a legislature can say, well, we took care of that 15 years ago, but in fact it is nothing but a law on the books. There's been no part of it that has actually changed people's behavior or made a workplace more safe or conductive to a good order. Paul, let's go over the nuts and bolts of the conference. When, where, who, and who can and should attend? What do people need to know about how to get to this conference, where it's going to be, and is there a cost associated with it?
Sure.
So those are all kinds of questions that people will have.
Right. Well, one of the goals for when I and my partner founded the Social Justice Initiative is to make it open to the public. So any of the events, be it a conference, a film, a speaker, everything is open to the public and without cost. This particular conference will be held on Saturday, September 30th at the Unitarian Universalist Church, 3.5 Main Street, Canton. And registration will start at 9:30 in the morning, and the sessions, the keynote will start at 10:30, and then we'll break for lunch, and then have the workshops in the afternoon, the networking session, and a final closing healing ceremony. And people can come for either just the keynote or the workshops.
Okay.
People aren't committed to coming the whole day because people are very busy and it'll be a nice fall afternoon.
Do you have a registration deadline in terms of when you would like to know for numbers and planning purposes?
Yeah, we don't have a deadline.
Okay.
What we do is we have a website set up. People can get to the registration, it's pre-registration page, by going to the UU Church's website, which is uucantony.org. And on the homepage, there will be a series of links that they can click through. And we would like people to pre-register because this lets us know which workshops should go in which size room, but people aren't required to pre-register, and there will be a little bit of controlled chaos as we get everything set up in the morning.
That's always the case when you're trying something new.
Yes.
James, what's your goal for this first conference? What in your mind will make this a success?
Well, I think attendance, people showing up, people gaining knowledge, people connecting with each other. I think there's something special about people connecting on a particular topic. Call it networking, but networking sometimes has a bad connotation, but I think I like the word connection more. I'm happy that anytime we have a beautiful historic building, I'm just happy when people are using it, and for good.
Well, it's very true that a lot of community organizations always find a welcoming home in the Canton Church because certainly you open your doors to everyone, and you do make a big effort to start to address some of these issues. And I think one of the things that we have seen in the last few months in particular is that communities are often being torn apart by issues of social justice, and sometimes they're having a very difficult time figuring out how to create the bridges to people who are in conflict and who don't see issues on the same side and can't find common ground. So this sounds like an excellent opportunity for not only workers but employers and managers to come together in a neutral space, talk about some very difficult issues, and find some of that very important common ground to move forward for everyone's sake.
Yes, that's actually a very important point, because when these issues reach a certain level of conflict, it becomes very divisive. It becomes the worker versus the management. When actually both sides of that equation should be working towards creating a healthy workplace, because then the workers are happy and they're safe and they don't develop illnesses, and then their productivity increases, and that
it's mutually beneficial.
Yes.
Right, there's loyalty on both sides.
Yes.
There's loyalty on both sides.
And
Which
so
is,
it's a matter of getting that dialogue early in the process, rather than letting the conflict escalate when those sorts of networking connections can fall apart.
well, we will put the website link in our show notes today for people. And I'm actually looking forward to it. It sounds to me like it's going to be a great opportunity to do a lot of learning. You have some very wide-ranging people from a lot of different geographic areas coming to the North Country to talk about these issues, as well as giving local folks the chance to come together to talk about these issues. So I think you've hit on a great first topic and a great way to start addressing this issue. So thank you both very much for coming in. It's been a pleasure to have you as our guest. Our time is up. These conversations are a production of North Country Matters, which are filmed here in the Potsdam Public Library's Fred W. Cleveland Computer Center. This show is a civic collaboration between the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women, the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters, and the Potsdam Public Library. Until next time, remember, our North Country matters. Paul, thank you so much. James, thank you so much. It's a great conversation.